Hello, mental workers, and welcome back to the podcast. As ever, I'm very excited to bring you this episode. We're going to be talking about working as a young psychologist, so a psychologist in your 20s. What's the advantages, the challenges, and how to navigate it? And we've got our wonderful guest here with us today. Their name is Kathleen Rippon. Hi, Kathleen.
Hey.
Can you just tell listeners who you are?
Yeah, so I am a provisional psychologist. I am studying the 4+2 pathway to get my general registration. And I guess I'm also like a content creator, YouTuber. I like to make little movies, but I also like to film videos that help psychology students. I'm really passionate about, I guess, supporting psychology students. So that's something that I like to try and do in my free time, on top of trying to work towards getting the general registration and getting all my 4+2 work done. But I'm nearly there, 6 months left, and then I should get my general registration.
Wow, congratulations. It just sounds nuts when you put it like that. It's like I like making videos on top of all my 4+2 requirements when it's like 4+2 is so onerous.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more than I anticipated, but I think video making is kind of like my happy place. It's like my identity outside of psychology, and I find that pretty helpful to take a step back and take a deep breath. And yeah, that's the place I go to unwind.
No, that is so cool. And listeners, the reason why I asked Kathleen to come on was because I saw that she did a video which was making it as a young psychologist. And I was like, this is genius stuff. I really loved it. I loved all your other videos as well, Kathleen. They're just super cool.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I had a lot of fun making that one in particular. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, we got to talk about this because I think it relates to a lot of early career psychs as well, because a lot of them are in their 20s. We do have some older early career psychs, but when you think about it, I reckon the majority of early career psychs would be in their 20s.
Yeah, I can relate. I'm still in my 20s just. I'm turning 30 next year. But I'm at the tail end of my 20s, so I can definitely relate.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic because then we can get your perspective in the moment as a young psychologist. And for me, I did my master's when I was 25, turning 26. And then I did my whole provisional registration, I guess like in my late 20s. And now I am 32, which sounds like so old. Like when I was 16, if I had learned that a 32-year-old was me, I would be like, God, you're so old.
Oh, no, yeah, actually, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But now I'm like at the end of 29, I'm like, no, that's still young. That's still young, right?
Yeah, totally. So, Kathleen, I guess we're really keen today, I guess first just to talk about how does the public perceive young psychologists? And then we're going to go into some advantages, disadvantages, and just some general, I guess, tips, hints on how to navigate it. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk with you about was, something you just brought up with me off mic, but it was this idea that there might be some stigma in the general public against young psychologists. What have you heard, or what do you think the perception is of young psychologists?
Yeah, it's tricky, and I really want to be careful here. I don't want to make generalizations. However, I do find that there's a bit of perhaps there's a little bit of a perception of people that are younger or look a bit young, that they might be a little bit more naive, have a little less life experience. I was watching this TikTok the other day, and a person was posting their experience of seeing a psychologist, and they had a really negative time. They were venting on TikTok. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but in the comments section, I was reading through, and a lot of people were posting or sharing about how psychologists just go into this profession young, they get swept up in academia, and they don't have enough, quote unquote, like life experience. So I don't want to make a generalization. However, I do think going into the role, or at least from my own experience, I felt very nervous to enter this profession because to some extent, when you are young, you don't have as much life experience as someone who's a bit older, and that can be such a useful thing in this profession. So I felt like that is part of this conversation. And there's the other part that the general public don't see, in that as a young psychologist, there is a sense of pressure to do we do so much study to get into this role. And it is really important to our work because we operate under the scientist practitioner model. So it is really important that the work that we do is guided by the science. And I think that is the tricky part that perhaps the public don't fully appreciate. Perhaps it is something, psychology, I think, is a discipline that's also still evolving. So there's a lot that kind of comes into it. And I really don't want to generalize this argument too much because I think there's some nuances, but I think this is part of what makes it tricky entering this profession as a young psychologist, because people can obviously see that you're still quite young, you're still finding your feet perhaps, and perhaps you might look like you haven't had enough life experience to be doing this role. I think that's sort of what can make it a little bit tricky coming into this role in your 20s.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's really important to examine the public's perception of psychologists, and particularly young psychologists. And again, just generalizing, but we know that some people, like those people who posted on the TikTok video, would be like, look, they just don't have enough real life experience. Some other things I've heard in the general public are like, they're inexperienced, they're unqualified, they haven't seen life. Who are they to give me advice? They're too book heavy, that kind of stuff. And when we have those general perceptions, they're things that as young psychologists we can pick up and be like, oh, maybe I am too young to be giving advice. Like, I wonder if those are some of the things that you felt.
I think that was my fear going into the role. Absolutely. That I think every young psychologist listening to this will relate, that sense of imposter syndrome. Like, should I actually be here? Can I do this job? And that was something that actually almost terrified me of going into this role. I think part of my sort of my hypervigilance around this was that my mom is a clinical psychologist. I kind of grew up seeing the journey she'd gone on, seeing sort of what psychology world is like, which is really cool in one sense. But in another sense, I was really cautious about stepping into this world. So I was quite hesitant. And that's part of the reason why I actually chose to do the 4+2. I had the option to I had the chance to apply for like a clinical PhD. A lot of people were encouraging me to do that when I was in my mid-20s. And I intentionally chose to go off script a bit and move overseas and live this whole different life outside of psychology for a while because I was quite scared to go into the profession. In the end, I came back to Australia and I decided to actually do the 4+2 for lots of different reasons. But part of it was that I wanted to just get a test taste of what doing clinical sort of work was like, to see if I actually really liked it and if I wanted to one day go on into a clinical PhD. So before I went into it, I remember having a conversation with a really good friend, and she went and done her clinical PhD. She's amazing. And I spoke to her about what it was like, and I shared with her how nervous I was and how worried I was about how the general public might perceive me in this role. And she shared with me that, you know what, going into this profession quite young can be an advantage in some respects. She shared with me that I'm trying to find the right words of how to put it, but there's a sense of curiosity. There's a sense of eagerness, wanting to come into the role and try and do a really good job by your clients. There's a sense of energy that perhaps we have as young psychologists. And she told me that she'd noticed from her own experiences that working as a young psychologist gave her that slight advantage that older psychologists, and again, I don't want to make generalizations here, but yeah, just that they might not always have that sense of curiosity or freshness, I guess, in going into the role, that sense of eagerness and wanting to try and understand the client's perspective.
Just commenting on that, it's like when I think of that, I'm like, wow, that really rings true for me, because it's like, let's say you're a person who, say, is a parent, and then you are seeing adolescent clients and you've got an adolescent child yourself. Like, you might carry expectations of what that client is experiencing or dealing with, whereas, say, a younger psychologist who, say, doesn't have a child might just come in completely fresh and have that curiosity.
Yeah, it's this beautiful term I've only learned recently, cultural humility. I think it's an amazing term because it basically means to really put yourself in another person's shoes, to really try and understand the world from their perspective, which obviously like Psych 101, that's when you want to try and do in a first session. But I don't think we always appreciate it enough, really trying to understand someone else's perspective. And yeah, as someone who's a younger psychologist talking to an adolescent, they might have they might be able to pick up or sort of understand or build rapport in a different way to an older psychologist would. And again, we don't want to make generalizations here. There's pros and cons to both parts of life, but I think trying to sort of own some of the advantages of being a young psychologist in this role is important, because there are some things that we bring to this role that I think are really cool, and that could be a little bit more energy or a little bit more freshness into the role where we're trying to really understand a person's perspective. But I just think it's a cool way of reframing things that helped me maybe break free of imposter syndrome, I guess, in the end, when I eventually did go on and start working as a provisional psychologist.
Yeah, and I think that echoes why it's so important to talk about it. I'm really glad your Clin Psych friend was able to give you that reframing and perspective. It does sound like it really helped. But it's like if we've internalized, say, this public perception that we don't have any life experience, that we're unqualified, we're inexperienced, focusing on some of the advantages can be super helpful. So it can be like, look, maybe I've got a unique way of connecting with clients. Maybe I've got a freshness and a curiosity that helps me to build rapport with particular clients as well. So I know that when I've worked with children and adolescents, for example, when I was a provisional psych, like 26, 27, the parents were like, and honestly, mistakenly, because I don't know anything about like, even though I was 26, 27, I didn't know anything about like adolescent culture. But they were like, you'll be able to relate with them. And I was like, yeah, of course. But it was just their perception, but it actually helped build rapport.
Oh yeah, adolescents are a tough crowd.
Yeah,
I avoid them because I'm definitely not cool enough. Not cool enough to work
I'm
with
also
them.
not cool enough. They'd be like, I didn't even know who Billie Eilish was when I was like doing work with teenagers. No. And they were like, yeah, Billie. And I'm like, who the hell is Billie?
Honestly, teenagers terrify me in the best of ways. Like they're great, but I'd be too nervous to work with them at the moment. Maybe that will change, but right now.
No, I hear you, Kathleen. I don't like working with them now. But I guess back to your point, like, do you see that there are any other advantages of being an early, I guess, or a younger psychologist?
Yeah, so I think, part of it is that freshness, that eagerness, that curiosity that we can really tap into. We've got the energy on our side because we're in our early 20s.
Yeah.
It goes away.
It really does.
Yeah. I'm stepping into my 30s and I'm starting to feel it, but I'm still in the 20s, not quite there yet. But I think another part to it too, and look, this will probably vary for everyone in their 20s. The 20s is such a random decade, but what's so cool about them is that you can literally make it whatever you want it to be. You can make it like your own adventure. You can do that with your whole life. But specifically in your 20s, it's like a cool time in your life where you can go and move to the other side of the world if you want to. You can go and study XYZ. You can start a YouTube channel if you want to. Like you can really make the 20s what you want it to be and be quite creative and take a little bit more risk, perhaps. So I guess responsible risk, but I guess something that I found to be really helpful is just that flexibility that you might not have as much of as you enter later stages in life, like your 30s or your 40s. You might be paying off a mortgage, or you might be married with kids. Who knows? I know the world is changing a lot and so are norms, but I think in your 20s, that is a great time to get really creative. And I found that to be an advantage in the sense that it's allowed me to experiment with lots of different things outside of psychology as well as inside psychology, try lots of different things out. And that in itself has helped me relate to my clients in a different way. It's helped me get to know myself and spend a bit more time working on myself, which is really useful for this profession. Any self-work you can do goes a long way in helping clients. It's really unique to everyone, but perhaps we have a slight advantage in that we can be a little bit more creative with the decade. We can step out of our comfort zone a bit more. We can go and just go on that crazy adventure, do that thing that you've been dying to do, challenge yourself a little bit more. And I think that those are things that help make a really good psychologist, being able to put yourself out of your comfort zone and really challenge yourself a little bit. You've got more scope perhaps to do that in your 20s if you've got a little bit of freedom and time, which we tend to lose more of as we get a bit older. So I really think that helps you in the role as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I just feel ultra proud of you that you were able to see the pressures that were coming towards you, particularly having a parent who's a psychologist. I guess like understanding where you could go. You could do that clinical PhD and then go down that path, but being like, look, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to go outside my comfort zone and just go see the world and move to a different country. That's nuts. And also really cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, best decision I ever made. And absolutely at the time, it was, it felt like in my gut, it felt like the right thing to do. But to everyone else, it probably looked a little bit crazy because I remember a lot of people in my honors cohort thought I was going to keep going. And I was just so burnt out coming out of honors. I don't know what you were like.
No, totally burnt out. 100%.
Yes, totally burnt out. I needed a break.
Honors is hands down the hardest year.
It really is. I think like I haven't done a master's yet. I'd love to, but I genuinely think honors, the pressure to get a first class, only psychology students will understand that. It's so amplified. And my mental health was, like, to be really honest, my mental health wasn't great. And I really wanted to work on that as well before becoming a psychologist. I wanted to sort of make that the priority. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. And yeah, it didn't, like on paper, it looked a bit odd because I was really going off script. I had a really good job at the time. I quit my job. I literally sold everything I earned and I ended up in London. Like, I knew no one there after backpacking around Asia, doing a bit of like an Eat, Pray, Love chapter. Like, it was so random. Like, I just did like really random things because I wanted to sort of get out of my comfort zone. Ended up in the UK, didn't know anyone, and started my life over from scratch. But I think what was good about that too was it also gave me the chance to develop my identity outside of psychology student and psychologist. And I think if you can try and do that, if you have the opportunity and the time to learn different parts of yourself outside of this profession, in a weird way, that really does complement and help you in the role. And I'm not basing this off science or peer-reviewed studies. And I know that's important to the profession. This is just from pure personal experience. I think it's important to go with what your gut feels right. But for me, one of my values was adventure and was to put myself out there and to try different things and to get kind of uncomfortable. That was really, really important to me. So yeah, I made that the priority in my 20s. And that's changed the way I relate to people in my role because it's just brought about I guess a richness from doing that I didn't have before. So that's really, really helped. But I think people have lots of different ways that they can do that. I think it's all comes back to diversifying your experiences in whatever way that looks like for you. And in your 20s, you've got a little bit more scope to do that because it is that time in your life where things are perhaps a little less structured. You might have a little less responsibility. You might be able to, to just try out different things. And that's so important to this role.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. So when we're talking about the imposter syndrome that might come with being a young psychologist, you've found that diversifying your experiences, doing some self-work, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, developing an additional role outside of being a psychologist has just really benefited like yourself, but also your client work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's helped me take the focus off of myself. Like, it's helped me tap less into that little voice, and we all have that little voice in our head that tells us we're not good enough to do something, or I don't know, whatever your voice tells you, but mine would beat me up. And I think pushing myself out of my comfort zone and just learning to get a bit more uncomfortable and learn how to get out of my head a bit. I don't know if other people found this, but I think all the study you do to become a psychologist, in the past, it would really draw me into my head and I get caught up in my own thoughts and feelings and sort of get caught up in my own bubble and my own stuff. But giving myself the freedom to get out of my head a bit more and kind of get involved in my own life and sort of live life, just kind of live life a little bit more. That just kind of helped me, I guess, fall back on this different part of myself that I didn't even know existed until I went overseas and learned that Kathleen is a little bit more extroverted than she realized. And she's good at, just doing some different things that I didn't realize before. So I think, diversifying your experiences can help you to learn a little bit more about yourself. And that in turn can help you feel a little bit more confident in what you're doing. And this is just coming from personal experience. I'm conscious that I'm not backing this up.
Oh, no, that's
science.
okay. We're very interested in your personal experiences on this podcast, Kathleen.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Because you're the one living it. So yeah, no, we're really excited.
There's a richness in that too, I guess. It's kind of like qualitative data, I suppose. So yeah.
It's also really cool to diversify your experiences, I think, because then you can empathize with your clients, because quite often we ask clients to do super scary things and change their mindset and change their behaviors. And by pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, you get to know what it's like to be in the hot seat and what it's like to experience change. Because I bet like moving to London, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies.
No, you've highlighted something I'm so passionate about. I'm like a massive believer in practicing what you preach. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like moving to London was terrifying. And it was a little bit naive as well. Like I didn't have a lot of money. I knew no one. I was literally starting my whole life again from scratch. And I'd also had to like learn to create a new identity for myself, because before then my identity was completely psychology student. Like it was all about being a psychologist. And I remember reaching a point during my honors year towards the end where I realized if I lost psychology, I would be completely distraught. Like I would have no sense of self because this is all I know. And I don't know, like I think to some extent you have to sort of be all consumed by psychology sometimes to get through it because it's quite intense. But yeah. Just kind of realizing that was affecting my self-esteem a lot made me think, okay, I have to change this. If I was working with a client, I'd be wanting to help them see that there is a life outside of this. How can I do that for myself? So for me, the answer was to move overseas, but that's quite drastic. I don't necessarily think you have to do that. That's why it's quite personal, whatever works for you. For me, that was the thing. But yeah, it's quite a unique journey.
Yeah. No, but I think that's so important as well because, when you are working as a psychologist, the risk of burnout is quite high in our profession. And I think if you're only seeing clients day in, day out, and then doing your paperwork and admin on top of that, it can, just really increase your risk of burnout. So you need to have those other identities, whether it's like art, writing, music, catching up with friends and family, collecting stamps, whatever brings you joy, like having those other things can just really, I guess, provide some rejuvenation.
I love the idea of collecting stamps. That's such an awesome hobby. Bronwyn, I completely agree. I really think that is the thing I'd be advocating for young psychologists. Go and find the things that help you revive and feel re-energized again. And that there's parts to your identity outside psychology that you can tap into. And when you get good at taking off psychology hat and coming home and putting on, I don't know, stamp collector hat or like baking hat or whatever hat it is, like go and tap into those other parts of your identity that make you, because they help you manage burnout, because that's such a, that is a tricky part to navigate, especially as a young psychologist. That's a really good point. So yeah, definitely learning the parts of me outside of psychology really helped me navigate the role as a young psychologist in my 20s. And the advantage there, being in your 20s, is that you probably have a little bit more time to figure that out. You might have a little less responsibility, or you might have a little bit more energy, whatever it is, but you probably do have a little bit more of a chance perhaps than when you do when you're older. And I know I'm generalizing there, but hopefully you've got a bit more of a chance.
Yeah, but I guess what we're speaking to overall is that like maybe we're told this story that you do honors, you do masters, and then you're a psychologist, and it's very much like A to B pathway. But I think what we're saying is that, look, guys, you do have an opportunity to not do that A to B. You can go A, go explore things, create your identity outside of psychology, learn about yourself, gain some more experiences, and then you can decide what it is that you want to do.
Yeah, like you can be so creative with this pathway. That's something I'm passionate about advocating on my YouTube channel. Even if you've got your general registration or you are a clinical psychologist, you still have scope, especially in your 20s, to go and still have that crazy adventure or go and do that thing that felt scary. You can still do things a different way. Or if you're a student, you can take your time with it. You don't have to rush through and try and get through it as quickly as possible. And I could go on a whole other tangent about that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. But overall, I would recommend don't. But it's totally what I did. I was like, calculating my hours every Friday. And I was like, okay, like only 15 more hours. Get it next week.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But you can actually take your time. And it's what I would totally recommend if I could do the pathway again. So I did the 5+1 pathway. But if I could do it again, there's so much to learn in psychology that I'd just be like, take it easy. Like you don't have to rush this.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I would say too to young psychologists. Remember, there are other elements of psychology outside of clinical psychology. There's so many different areas of psychology that you can explore. And if you're feeling a bit bad, like I guess everyone knows there's not just clinical psychology, but there are so many different companies and different things you can do and work for, and so many different things you can try out. I remember that psychology is such a diverse field within itself. So if you're finding one thing kind of like if you're feeling like you're burning out a little bit, there's lots of different areas you could tap into and explore and try out. Get creative and go for that, because I think that also is a really great thing to do too, especially while you're young and you're trying to figure out what your niche is. Don't be afraid to really broaden yourself or try out lots of different things, or get creative with it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no, finding your niche is just one of my gripes. I hate the idea that you sit down and you just look at a list or something and then you try and work out what your niche is. Like, I think for me, I'm just like, it's something that you develop or gain insight into through doing and through having experiences. And then you work out what it is that you like and what you're drawn to, not by being like, okay, I'm going to niche in this.
Absolutely. Yeah. My mom always says to me, she says, look, at some point it's just going to snap for you and you're just going to figure it out. And I completely agree. Just through trying things out and realizing there's so much out there.
So much.
I did not appreciate that. I think actually living in the UK really helped me, because they do psychology different over there. And I didn't realize how different that world was. So there's a lot you can do with psychology and appreciate that. And the cool thing about starting in this profession young is that you've got the advantage to delve into different pockets of psychology throughout your career, because it's so diverse. I absolutely love this profession. It's such a great field to be in.
It totally is. Yeah, no, I can really hear that passion coming through, Kathleen. I did want to do a bit of a 360 and ask you, how we're talking about that clients might be like, okay, maybe you have no idea what you're doing. I'm just curious, have you ever experienced any prejudice from your clients, or like have anybody ever said like, oh, Kathleen can't do that because she's young?
Really good question. I think what's helped me a lot in this profession, I've got a bit of an advantage, right? Because my mom's a clinical psych, so I've got a lot of her help, and I don't take that for granted.
That's so amazing.
I think I'm really lucky. Like I know it, so I remind myself of that. But I think what I've seen is my colleagues who are in their early 20s, and I've seen instances where they felt a bit of prejudice, or felt perhaps just a little bit more of that imposter syndrome, or a little bit more feeling of what am I doing, or just feeling like they might be perceived as a bit too young to be in this role. And I guess it's also in the industry I'm working in. I do work with a lot of older people. Yeah, look, I've observed it in my colleagues. Maybe I felt it a little bit myself once or twice here and there. I think my things that probably help me is that I'm doing this work in my late 20s. So I recognize that's a significant advantage. And I think if you're sort of in your younger 20s, your mid 20s, your early 20s, I should say, I think if you're sort of in that age range, it can be a little bit harder and a little bit trickier to navigate. And I think it sort of comes back to reminding yourself that you've got lots of resources available. Hopefully you've got you've got supervision, you've got peer supervision as well. Pulling on resources like that also really enriches your practice and your experience. And I think that's how I've watched younger psychologists navigate it. And I include myself in that group because that's how I've handled it too. When I have a tricky presentation, I go above and beyond to prepare. And I'm sure a lot of other psychologists are the same. I will do a lot of research. I'll talk to people that can help. I'll look at different resources. I'll look at how I want to set up my case, what my case formulation is and how I'm going to work out my treatment plan for them. So I really go above and beyond in preparing. And that's how I've handled clients that are a little bit trickier. And I think that's how younger colleagues, I'm including myself in the young bracket because I'm still in my 20s and I am still quite young, but I've also seen that's how colleagues in their mid 20s or even the early 20s have handled it as well. That extra step of preparation that I think can really, really help. And I think that also comes back to that energy that we bring to the role. The fact that we do go above and beyond to support a client, that shows in the client. They can see all that work that you put into the session. That doesn't go unnoticed. I found clients will step back and reflect and say, wow, you've done a lot of practical things to support me here. I'm really glad that you've come up with a bit of a treatment plan and you've got X, Y, Z things to share with me. I think they notice that. And that's how, I feel like that's how sometimes you can win clients over a little bit by showing them that you're coming into the session really prepared. I think that makes a big difference to clients when they see that.
Yeah, I agree, because I always think from a client's perspective, it's like they're thinking, can you help me? And if we show them, hey, I've thought about this really hard, I've gotten support, here's how I think I can help you. You're right, it doesn't go unnoticed by clients. And I've had clients directly give me feedback being like, I really appreciate the efforts that you've gone to with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, I think it does really show, it stands out for them.
It's really good to hear that you haven't experienced, I guess, prejudice for your age directly. And maybe you've felt it, but it hasn't been directly said to you. Is that right?
Yeah, it's probably been once or twice, or maybe a few times where I felt it a little bit. And I really focused on letting that go. That brings me to another point I was going to mention too. Sometimes I am I'm always honest with clients and say, look, I'm a provisional psychologist. I'm still in training. I say to them, I've got a great, I work with my supervisor closely. To make sure I provide the best service to you. So I think they know that I'm still in training. They know that I've got good resources and support. And yeah, I think that part too, that honesty. I don't want to go into a client and say, hey, I'm an excellent psychologist. Off the bat, obviously, I think every psychologist, especially provisional, would want to be honest and say, hey, I'm a provisional psychologist, or hey, I'm a general registered psychologist or a clinical psychologist. I've got this amount of experience. So you're upfront and you're kind of honest with them. I think clients also kind of appreciate that honesty too.
I agree. I think they do as well. And sometimes clients, I've had, when I was a provisional psychologist, I had a client who I said, I'm a student, and they were like, good, it means you'll be more attentive. And I was like, sure.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. That part is so true. I think there is a sense that younger psychologists, we want to do a really good job. We want to try and learn as much as we can. Yeah, that's really awesome. I'm glad she said that.
Yeah, me too. I was like, okay. But I think there is that perception that sometimes clients have, which is that maybe a psychologist who's been doing this for 30, 40 years might not see them as a unique individual. And I think there might be a perception by the public that maybe a young psychologist would see them as that individual and not apply the knowledge that or the biases that they have from other clients onto them. So, I think that's a really good advantage, even if it's not true, but it's a perception. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's another nuance to the argument that we haven't really gone into, but that's another part to it too. It's why we can't necessarily make generalizations about clients.
Yeah.
There's so many different parts that come into this, but that's a really good point. There's also a perception in the public that yes, younger psychologists are wanting to do really well. They're wanting to do their best by you. They're wanting to go above and beyond and try and give that extra layer of support. So I think that's a good point.
Kathleen, is it all right if I share my experience with, I guess, being a younger psychologist when I was a younger psychologist?
Yeah, please do. I'd love to hear what yours was like.
I just wanted to share with listeners that my first placement as a 5+1 psychologist was working with older adults on an older adult day program in a private hospital. And so I worked exclusively with older adults aged 65 plus, and I was 26. And I was terrified because I was like, all these older people, they've got so much life experience. And here's me, 26-year-old Bronwyn. I look like a baby, just coming in and doing mental health sessions with them. And it was really interesting. Mostly my advice would be, I recommend everybody work with older adults because it completely smashed all of my insecurities about my age. And here's what I learned, which is that it does not matter your age. All they want from you is for you to do a good job. They don't care how old you are. If you can facilitate a group, if you can help them with their mental health, they do not care. Also, don't patronize them. That was the other thing, because they can pick up if you're patronizing. And I made that mistake very early on in my placement. And I don't think I was trying to be patronizing, but the client experienced it as patronizing and they told me so. And I made very certain to never do that again. So you need to mutually respect your clients and not treat them as though they don't know things, but give them the full respect that they deserve, which goes for everybody in ensuring their dignity. But as soon as I was working with older clients, I was just like, no, it's fine. And I actually had some great feedback from one of my patients, which was, they said to me that when I first came into the room, they were thinking, oh God, who's this young person? What have they got to say? And then said to me, but as soon as you started, I was like, this is fantastic. And it was honestly the best piece of feedback. And I thanked them profusely for like providing that negative perception that they had on me and how it was corrected through experiencing my work. And yeah, I guess like since then, I haven't had any fears about working with older adults. And so it's really just fine. I just make sure I just do whatever I do for everybody else, which is treat them with respect and dignity and try to give them the best help that I can.
Oh, I'm so glad you added in that perspective. I think that is really, really helpful because you've had people be able to say, oh, like, you've experienced a bit of the judgment, but also sort of how quickly it can change when they see, because, if you're working as a psychologist, you do have a great skill set. Like you've worked hard to get there.
You do. You have. Yeah.
You
actually know
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
You actually know stuff.
You do.
Yeah. And like, I always think as well that, as psychologists, unless you're working in a peer education environment where you're directly using your personal experiences, say you're working as a drug and alcohol counselor and the service expects, or it's just an expectation of the service that you use your personal experience in that way. Clients aren't coming to us for our personal experiences. We can certainly use that to build rapport and to self-disclose when it's appropriate, but they're not coming exclusively to know that, we skydive every weekend or something.
Yeah. The session, that's exactly right. The session is all about them. And the more that you can bring the attention back to them and approach it with curiosity and that attentiveness that I think we bring into the profession as young psychologists, perhaps, we sort of bring that keenness and that willingness to learn. And there's a beautiful phrase, actually. The world is our classroom and people are our teachers, or people are like our projects or whatever. I didn't quite quote that correctly, but something like that.
No, I get what you're saying. I've seen something like that as well, that, when you get insecure and you've got the imposter syndrome, remember that clients are like your greatest teachers. Be curious.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that there's, I've seen clients kind of light up when I put all the focus on them and try and really understand their stories and I want to understand their perspective and learn what they have to say. I think that in itself is therapeutic. It's feeling really hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that can be a really useful tool to tap into. Coming back to, I've raved on about this so much, but that energy and enthusiasm that you bring into this role when you're young, I think is pretty cool. And we need to kind of own that more, because Yeah, it's an awesome tool we have.
Yeah, it is. It really is, because we do come with so much hope. I found that as a provisional psychologist, I think this is a personality characteristic as well, but I was actually really good at instilling hope in people, depression, because it's like I just genuinely felt that just in my general life. And I was like, of course you can get through this. You're in like shit valley right now, but you can get through it. And so I feel like, maybe as a cohort, younger psychologists do carry that hope a lot with them.
Maybe we haven't sort of been worn down by the world, so to speak, yet.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, there's time for that in the future, but I think in like your 20s, like, you're still thinking the world is pretty all right most of the time.
You've got that sort of that young optimism. Maybe there's a hint of naivety, but
yes,
perhaps perhaps that's a really useful thing. Of course, you treat it with sensitivity and care, especially with clients and with the work that we do. But clients being, feeling there's a sense that you believe in them and that you hope the best for them and you want to do your best to support them. I think that can really talk volumes to clients. And yeah, I think that's always been the tool I fall back on, especially if I'm feeling, well, especially in the beginning, I guess, when I felt a bit nervous that my age was going to matter. And then I think going through the process, you've summed it up so well, Bronwyn, sort of realizing working with older people actually, you kind of washes away any sense of feeling like, oh, yeah, I'm not good enough or I don't know enough. Actually, I think working with older clients has really helped me step into this role a little bit more and stepped into my psychologist hat, I suppose.
Yeah, because you've worked with older clients as well, hey?
Yeah. I don't know I don't think I've gone past 65 yet, but I have worked with clients in their 50s and 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I have had one client say something quite similar to what you said earlier, something to the effect of, oh, I came into this thinking, oh, she's just like a young, something just about basically being like a young woman still figuring herself out or whatever.
Yeah.
That was her slight perception of me. But we worked together for probably nearly 12 sessions, I think, in total. We worked together for a while. And over that period, she shared with me that the tools that I'd helped her learn, there were things that she didn't realize, that toolkit that I have developed through studying psychology. Yes. And I was able to instill that to her. And I was able to remind her, you're the expert in you. I'm the expert in psychology, and own that for myself, not try and feel too weighed down by imposter syndrome. Together we're working as a team.
Yeah, that's so important just to remember that. It's like, you're not saying you're the expert on their life and like who they are and where they're going. And but you're the expert on the psychology. That's the unique thing that you bring to this relationship.
Yeah, it's a collaborative process and we're going to treat it like teamwork, right? I always like to have that mindset with a client and honor the expertise they have in themselves, because they are the expert in them. Yeah,
totally. And I still do that these days. Like if a client tells me the situation, I'll be like, I trust your perception of that. And I'll just openly say that to them. And I'm like, what would happen more with your best friend than what I would, so I'm going to trust that perception.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not psychologists, I think clients really appreciate that. So again, I think that's another advantage I found coming into the profession young. I think being able to learn to own my own intelligence around psychology, all the work and effort I've put into it, and appreciate the client's perspective and their expertise in them and how it's a team effort. It's a two-way street, and that's so important in this work.
Yeah. And I guess if I'm to summarize that, it sounds like the insecurities, if we have any around our age, it's like we need to realize that maybe we're projecting that onto our clients, that insecurity, but we can own our knowledge and we don't have to be insecure about ourselves because we've actually done a lot of the hard work. We've literally studied for years.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. When you can get to a place, I think, where you start to really appreciate that about yourself, and you start to think, hey, I have done all this hard work. I am pretty knowledgeable in this area. I've done at least 5 to 6 years of study to get to this point.
Yeah.
When you can start to own that, it helps you develop a sense of confidence in yourself. And I don't think I would have got there if I hadn't have diversified experience. I think for me that was important, but I think there's lots of different ways to get there. I think, and part of it is that in your 20s, you've got time and you've got energy to figure it out. And that really goes a long way in helping you set you up for success in this field, which is such an exciting field to be in. We're so lucky to be working in this space.
Oh, 100%. Well, Kathleen, I think we've covered a lot. We talked about the advantages, the challenges, and how you've navigated that, and a little bit about how I've navigated that, and I guess the value that younger psychologists do bring to the profession. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
I've just really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed being able to share in this dialogue, and I really hope that this helps or speaks to someone who's a bit unsure or if you're feeling a bit confused. I hope this helps. And I think if you're in this job and you're listening to this podcast, you're probably doing really, really well. And take time out to really self-congratulate yourself and honor the important work that you do.
Oh, aren't you so sweet? I feel so happy listening to you. I hope listeners instill that and carry that with them as well. I think you've given them a great compliment. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for coming on and sharing your professional lived experience expertise. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this chat.
No worries. And Kathleen, if listeners want to find more about you or get in touch, where can they find you?
Oh, yes. Well, sneaky plug, I guess, to the YouTube channel. If you want to come and check out the channel, please do. I've got some really exciting content coming up that I'm keen to share. So you can find my YouTube channel. It's called Kathleen Ann. And I guess all my social media links are on the channel. So go and check it out. And hopefully I can connect with you on that platform. I'm pretty open and I enjoy having conversations with psychologists and students. So
oh, beautiful. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes. So listeners, go have a look at them. Check out Kathleen's channel. It's really good. She has so many good videos. And thank you again, Kathleen, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Listeners, thank you for listening. Have a good one and catch you next time. Bye.